I don't know. Sorry. Yeah, I'll take care of girls. I got it. No problem.
We're going to be covering kind of a full overview of the system, kind of broken down into the three major parts, which are the Big Marker channel, which is the account setup, the webinar creation and setup process, and then also the hosting experience from an attendee and a host perspective. But before we kind of jump into today's demo, just a bit of housekeeping. So we're going to be going through today's session. I do invite you, if you have any questions along the way, to write them into the chat or into the Q&A. Hopefully we'll get to those questions live, but of course, if we do not respond live, we will also follow up through email following today's session. So get those questions in and we will certainly answer them. And then in terms of kind of freebies, we will be giving out some really great handout content at the end of today's session for just
and the Nature Conservancy of Washington, featuring candidates for the open seat in Washington's 10th Congressional District. Moderating tonight's event is DJ Wilson, publisher of the Washington State Wire. And to kick us off, here is Mike Stevens, the Washington State Director of the Nature Conservancy.
Washington State's 10th district is and has been home to the Muckleshoot, Puyallup, Nisqually, Squaxin, Chehalis, and Cowlitz peoples, among others, since time immemorial. I'd ask us to bear in mind their legacy of stewardship during our conversation tonight. This debate will focus on climate, the environment, the economy, and social justice, areas where we as a society are experiencing many challenges and where we as a state have many opportunities. We've organized the conversation this way because the causes of these challenges are intertwined, and the solutions are too, as they must be if we are to create a more sustainable world. At the Nature Conservancy, our work in 70 countries is motivated by a vision of nature and people thriving together. We have been in Washington for 60 years and have offices and projects around the state. We also manage over 100,000 acres of natural areas and working forests. As we look forward, we are focused on helping to solve the biggest challenges to nature and people in the region: climate change, water quality, forest health, and habitat protection. Our advocacy in Olympia and DC focuses on practical, science-based solutions to these environmental challenges. Our ability to work through environmental and natural resource issues is a reflection of our strength as a democracy. The purpose of this event is to provide a nonpartisan public forum for candidates to share their positions and priorities about these issues. TNC, the Nature Conservancy, cannot and does not take positions on candidates for public office. We knew we wouldn't be able to include all 14 candidates in this race in this evening's event and have the robust discussion we're hoping to see. So we've invited the top 6 fundraisers and are grateful that they have all accepted our invitation to speak with you tonight. We're excited to begin, so I'll turn it over to DJ Wilson from the Washington State Wire.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that introduction. And to our candidates, thank you for making time. To the more than 500 of you who are watching this show live, and to the folks who will be watching this full recording at The Wire and on other online outlets, welcome to our conversation tonight. In this time of COVID, of course, nothing in technology always works smoothly and is according to plan. So the glitches that may or may not occur tonight may occur on your end, they may occur on our end, they may occur someplace in between. Of course, we'll have the full video of this conversation available at our site, thewashingtonstatewire.com, here following this event. Our ground rules tonight are relatively simple for our candidates, whom I will introduce here momentarily. We have a set of 16 questions. Those questions are divided into 4 sections. The first section is the environment and climate. Second section is economic policy. Third is social justice. And fourth is a section about the campaigns and candidates themselves. Each question will, well, almost each question will get about a 2-minute opportunity to respond, with some follow-ups directed to specific candidates. In other words, we are ordering our questions by the order of fundraising. So tonight's first question will go to Kristine Reeves, but the follow-ups will come as a result of my directions to them. The reason we have scripted the order of these questions is so that we want to ensure as much as possible that at the end of this evening, every candidate will have as much equal time and as much of a fair opportunity to offer thoughts and comments and their vision for the future of our country as equal amount of time as possible. So without further ado, well, I should say 2 more things before I forget. Candidates will have an opportunity to jump in if they really want to. We have created an opportunity for me to use my discretion to allow some of that to happen. However, in any case, if that were to happen, we ask candidates to not interrupt, to allow candidates to give their full and complete answer, and that at the risk at a later point in this event that I will subtract time from them on other questions to, again, try to make sure that we have all things equal. For those of you who are participating online and live, you'll note that we have a chat box set up to the right of this screen. And at that chat box, you are welcome to comment. We've invited the campaigns to have representatives participate in that chat box. So if you have a specific question to one of the campaigns, maybe a follow-up about one of the things a candidate may have said, that way the campaigns can directly respond to you and maybe offer a link to the candidate's platform or other information to help inform your decision-making in this election. So if at any point people become a little bit unruly or disrespectful, we can shut those folks down and make sure that those folks are no longer able to speak on our platform. So we envision this as being a constructive opportunity and hope that you will all find it worth your time to participate in. Without further ado, let me introduce the candidates that we have with us tonight. We have Kristine Reeves, a Democrat, Beth Doglio, also a Democrat, Marilyn Strickland running as a Democrat, Phil Gardner, a Democrat, Joshua Collins from the Essential Workers Party, and Nancy Slotnick, Republican. Thank you all again for being with us. Our first question goes to you, Ms. Reeves. I want to ask a question about access to nature. Studies have shown that access to nature improves health and well-being. During the pandemic, we've seen that access to nature is both critically important, but yet inequitable. In some areas, parks are overflowing, and in other areas, people simply don't have access to nature. So what have you done as a legislator to improve access to nature, and what would you like to do as a member of Congress to address this challenge? You'll have 120 seconds to respond.
Thanks, DJ. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. that access to nature, we know, improves mental health, it improves quality of life. I've had the opportunity, both as a former staffer to Senator Murray and as a state legislator, to see the direct impacts for communities of color, for low-income communities. It's why I fought for environmental justice in our state legislature for the first time in our state's history, to center frontline communities and communities of color in how we combat climate change. Because quite frankly, whether it's making sure that veterans can get outside and address the unseen wounds of war when they come home through environmental therapy, whether it's fighting for Wild Olympics in our region, or whether it's making sure that kids have a safe place to play in public. These are all important priorities and things that I am committed to making sure that we advance in Congress as we fight for environmental justice for everyone.
Very good. Joshua Collins, would you like to follow up for 60 seconds?
Yeah, my experience in dealing with climate change has been trying to get sitting politicians to act on it. I think one of the biggest issues with in regards to climate change is the corrupting influence of money in politics. We have a lot of politicians who are bought by the fossil fuel industry and other industries, and we end up with a Congress that says they support acting on climate change and fixing our environment and making sure that things are, actually taken care of, and they just don't. They are paid to have to not have the political will. They're paid to not act on things, and we end up with what we have today, which is climate change not being addressed, and a lot of very small measures, both on the local, state, and federal level. So if I were in Congress, I would be pushing aggressively for serious action.
Mr. Gardner, would you like to respond for 60 seconds to this question?
Unmute. Everyone has Zoom issues. Yeah, well, thanks, DJ and the Nature Conservancy for hosting. Access to nature is such a critical thing, especially out here in the Pacific Northwest, where I think a big reason why a lot of us love to live out here and move out here is our access to nature. And our national parks are a national treasure. And it's something that as we go through our pandemic recovery, we need to keep an eyes watched to make sure that Republicans don't try to gut those national parks or even try to privatize them, as some people in their parties do. Our natural parks are just too important. Access to nature is too important. And we need to make sure that as we, again, come out of this recovery and reckon with issues of racial justice and systemic racism, that we think about ways that we can improve access to those lands for everybody in our country. And also ways that we can include our native tribal nations and indigenous peoples who were on this land to begin with. So I think it's a tragic situation we're in, but there's also a lot of opportunity here if we're thoughtful about it going forward, and certainly we need to think about our environment as part of that.
Very good. Our second question is directed to you, Ms. Strickland. This is about our Puget Sound strategy, or a Puget Sound strategy. The Great American Outdoors Act just passed the U.S. Senate with broad bipartisan support and with the backing of many business groups. That bill will make bold new investments in parks and open space and public lands. Puget Sound needs a strategy of similar magnitude. The Puget Sound ecosystem faces a severe challenge with stormwater pollution and salmon and orca populations in decline. So what would you say is what is the next Puget Sound strategy that we can build support for, and how would you develop such a strategy? With whom in Congress would you work to do that?
Hello, everyone. So thank you for that question. I would say one thing that we really have going for us already in the 10th district is that Denny Heck and Derek Kilmer have started the Puget Sound, an effort to save the Puget Sound. And so let's keep funding that and let's keep building on it. As this population continues to grow in the Puget Sound, we know that we have to be fully aware of the impact of stormwater runoff into the water and how that's going to affect the ability to keep that water clean. The other thing that's important too, though, is the conversation about access. And I know that we talk about environmental justice and access, but that means that we have to ensure that we're communicating with people from all backgrounds and helping people understand that these waterways that we love and treasure belong to all of us. So how are we doing things in schools to educate people that there's something here for everyone? The strategy would be building upon the efforts that are already happening with restoration. It would acknowledge the fact that population growth can have a negative impact, and also too ensuring that we keep moving forward with the project about the Howard Hansen Dam to ensure that fish passage is going to happen because we have an opportunity to clean up that water and to increase the number of salmon that go out. So as we talk about what this means to us as a community, it's about keeping it clean. It's making sure the ecosystem is doing well, but continuing to build on the work that Denny Heck and Derek Kilmer started.
Ms. Slotnick, would you like to follow up for 60 seconds?
And again, Zoom, unmute. Sure. Well, I think we really definitely do need to deal with the stormwater runoff as well as our solid waste management going into our waterways. We have a huge problem all up and down the waterways with the dumping that is happening from our storm drains and also from illegal camping near the waterways, and that's being drained directly into our waterways, especially along the Duwamish. So I'd like to see, we need to aggressively deal with that issue. Also, we need to continue to, I just heard today that we're doing great work in improving the fish ladders on the dams, and that we're right now at 97 to 98% survival rate of the fish going back into the water. So that's a huge benefit and progress that we've made.
Ms. Doglio, would you like to respond to this question?
Sure, absolutely. Well, clearly our orca and salmon, our iconic salmon, are really endangered. And the Puget Sound is such an iconic place in the Northwest, and I will do everything possible to protect it and restore it. Certainly, I will work with Representative Derek Kilmer, who with Denny Heck has done tremendous work on bringing in dollars to help restore Puget Sound. Stormwater is a very significant issue. Moving us towards vehicle electrification will really help to remove a lot of the oils and contaminants on our roads that move into our sound and really is threatening our orca and salmon. I stood up to the chemical industry and negotiated the strongest chemical reduction, toxics reduction act in the nation, which was part of our orca protection agenda in the legislature. And finally, we need to build on the amazing work at the Nisqually watershed and do that in all watersheds. What an amazing success story we've seen in Nisqually, and really doing amazing restoration work and restoring our sound.
This next question will remain with you, Ms. Doglio. The climate crisis is perhaps the most urgent issue of our time, impacting every sector of society, ranging from environmental to social and health, economic, and others. While the state of Washington has taken bold action to reduce emissions and act on the scale that is needed to address the crisis, many climate proposals have been introduced in Congress and have failed to gain adequate support. So what would you do differently that would result in success on climate?
Well, you know, I'm running because I really think that we need to address the climate crisis at scale. When we were considering this decision in my family, my 16-year-old son said, "Mom, you've got to run for Congress. You are the best person to address the climate crisis, and that's the most important issue for my generation." I was the first executive director of Washington Conservation Voters, and I've spent the last 13 years working at Climate Solutions, and I'm the only candidate in this race that has the depth of knowledge and experience in actually passing policies to create our fossil-free future. We need someone with the experience in taking on the fossil fuel industry and actually winning. I was the director of the Power Pass Coal campaign, and working hand in hand with tribal nations, we were able to stop 7 coal export facilities dead in their tracks. As a legislator, I was front and center in getting the 100% clean electricity bill to the governor's desk. And it's the first in the nation to actually require equity measures and to incentivize labor standards. And I was the prime sponsor of the Clean Buildings Bill, which requires an efficiency standard for existing commercial buildings. I am very proud to have the endorsement of the League of Conservation Voters, Sierra Club, and the Sunrise Movement. If I'm elected to Congress, which I hope I am, I will work inside the caucus to organize, just like I have in the state legislature, and bring in my 30 years of advocacy experience, the power of grassroots organizations to help build out
policies that move us in the direction of reducing greenhouse gases and creating policies at scale so that we can leave a planet to our children.
Very good. Ms. Reeves, would you like to follow up on that question for 60 seconds?
Thanks, DJ. Well, as a mom of 2 young kids, I know how critical addressing climate change is. I want to make sure that my kids know what a blue sky and a green tree look like, and we can't wait a short few years for Donald Trump to go away to make that happen. But I'll tell you, there are 2 very specific things that I would focus on. One, we've got to stop treating the climate crisis as a siloed issue. We need to treat it as an intersectional challenge that has to be addressed in our housing policy, in our food security policy, in our transportation policy. It has to be addressed in our economic policy. And as an economic developer, I've done that firsthand. And then secondly, what I would tell you is we've got to make sure that we can keep talking about saving the planet, but if the people on the planet don't feel like they can save themselves by paying their bills, putting food on the table, and keeping a roof over their head, we're going to have a really hard time building that coalition of folks committed to making sure that we can save the planet at the same time. So those are just two ways that I would bring a different perspective and a different lived experience to fighting to ensure that our climate continues. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Ms. Strickland, would you like to respond to this question for 60 seconds?
Yes, thank you for that. So the House Select Committee on Climate Crisis just released a report called the Congressional Action Plan, and it's based on 12 pillars. So you can't necessarily start them all at once, but I say that there are a couple that are very, very important here. And it talks about investing in infrastructure. And this is really important because we know that if we're going to transition to a cleaner energy future, then we have to build the infrastructure that allows people to make better choices when it comes to how they use energy. By investing in infrastructure, we're also creating family wage jobs. And when we create those jobs, we want to make sure that they are done in a way that is inclusive so that people who are transitioning out of industries that may be fossil fuel based can still make a decent living. That's incredibly important. The other thing that's important here, though, is also looking at what this means when we talk about equity and inclusion. The conversation about energy and climate change is important, but it's also an opportunity to frame it as a jobs plan that's inclusive and equitable and just. So that's one thing I'd work on right away.
Very good. This next question is to you, Mr. Collins. Your platform includes a number of clean energy plans, but we know that even though climate change is happening, our ability to impact that will not overly mitigate the near-term impacts. Climate change is a long-term process. What are your proposals to prepare the 10th district and the country for the climate impacts we will continue to experience, such as wildfire, drought, and flooding, in spite of climate action?
As a truck driver, I was a truck driver for 5 years, by the way. I literally saw the country transforming. I've driven through almost every mountain range in this country, and I watched our forests burn. I would go through a pass 1 year, and the next year I'd come back through, and it's just a bunch of burnt down trees. I've seen the transformation. I've seen that our country is actually being destroyed by climate change. If I were in Congress today, I would be bringing attention to it in a way that no other person in Congress could. I would be speaking on it from the perspective of someone who is generally left out of the conversation in politics. You know, there's over 3.5 million truck drivers in this country, and not a single one in Congress, barely any in any level of politics. And I can say very strongly that it directly impacts truck drivers and people involved in the transportation industry. If I would be making sure that people understand that this isn't an issue that is just you know, far off in the future, but it's already happening, that our forests are already burning. And I think the biggest issue with climate change and the lack of political will is both the corrupting money, influence of money in politics, but the lack of education of the general population. They're not being informed on how it's directly affecting them and how our environmental policies are leading to them drinking poison water and their children drinking poison water in their schools. And just, yeah, I don't know. I think that we should be approaching this from the perspective of a regular person and what, you know, how it's going to affect you, if whether you're a truck driver or a nurse or a teacher, and let people know that this isn't something that just impacts the people who are, you know, tree huggers. It's everybody. So.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Gardner, this next question is for you. The Treasury Department has said the gap between what the US government spends and what it collects in taxes has now widened to $1.88 trillion for just the first 8 months of this fiscal year. This is an all-time high, projected to exceed more than a 10% shortfall by the end of the year. Your boss, Representative Denny Heck, voted for these appropriation bills in 2019, as did a number of congressional Democrats. Do you believe the United States should have a balanced budget at any point in the future, in good times or in bad? If so, what policies would you support to close the deficit? And if not, why is adding debt to future generations of Americans acceptable if we're not willing to pay our bills ourselves? You have 120 seconds for this.
Yeah, well, thanks, DJ. And I mean, I think at this present moment, we're in a crisis. We really can't worry about the deficit. Even Mitch McConnell says that. But look, DJ, we're not really going to make progress on any of these issues if we don't first get to the root of the problem. And that's the corrupt system of super PACs and dark money that dominates our democracy. And unfortunately, Representative Reeves, Mayor Strickland, and Representative Doglio have already let themselves get sucked into this corrupt system. Right now, all three of them are exploiting a notorious loophole created for candidates supported by super PACs. Let me explain. It's illegal for a candidate to privately coordinate with a super PAC. A candidate can't tell a super PAC, here's what your ads should say, and here's the target audience. But there's a loophole called red boxing. And here's how red boxing works. A candidate posts on their own website, inside of a red box, a detailed instruction manual for a super PAC. Then the super PAC reads those red boxes and spends their unlimited dark money as instructed. Simple enough. Now, if this were done in secret, it would be illegal. But since it's being done online, out in the open, candidates can get away with it. And sadly, all three of my Democratic opponents have these red boxes on their websites. This is what Representative Reeves's looks like. This is what Mayor Strickland's looks like. And this is what Representative Doglio's looks like. And I just tweeted out images of all of these if anyone wants to go look at them themselves. But to give you an example of what they sound like, they're not something that any voter would ever want to look at. Here's what Representative Doglio says. It says, likely primary voting Democrats/independents who are female, progressive, under 40, or over 60 need to read and see, particularly through digital mediums first, not including Facebook, about Beth Doglio. Obviously, no one but an ad maker for a super PAC could find that information useful. It's corruption hiding in plain sight, and it needs to stop. So I'm calling on my opponents to remove their super PAC instruction manuals from their websites. They could take down their red boxes tonight. And if they don't and they leave them up there, the only reason is because they want to coordinate with a super PAC.
I want to give an opportunity to Ms. Reeves, Ms. Doglio, or Ms. Strickland to respond to that for 30 seconds. If you take the opportunity, candidates, I'll subtract that time from you later in the evening. I want to give you the opportunity to respond if you would like. If not, I'll move on to my next question, which is to Ms. Slotnick. And Ms. Slotnick, under President Ronald Reagan, tax cuts focused on the wealthiest Americans became known as trickle-down economics, part of a trickle-down economics strategy. The idea was that cuts for the wealthy would spur economic activity. Yet in the 40 years since then, income inequality has widened, social mobility and economic opportunity have degraded. This is particularly true for people of color. Meanwhile, poverty has increased across all demographics. Do you think trickle-down economics has succeeded as a fiscal policy? And how do you support your answer either way?
So trickle-down economics, I don't like the term trickle-down economics, but I definitely understand the principle. I think that it's important that we support all elements of our economy. So it was especially clear during the CARES, when we were passing the CARES Act. Not only do we need to support the workers, but we also needed to balance that with supporting the corporations that were suffering so that those workers will have jobs to go back to. And so I think the same goes with tax breaks. We have to apply them equally across and then incentivize companies to hire for talent and compete for talent and use wages to compete for talent in the industry.
Very good. Thank you. Our next question is to Ms. Strickland. Our country is facing its most massive unemployment challenge in anyone's recorded history or recent memory, and maybe ever. During the Depression, a key recovery strategy was the creation of multiple federal jobs programs. Some of these included the Civilian Conservation Corps, which created 2 million jobs. The Civil Works Administration created 4 million jobs, and ultimately, many of these rolled into the Works Progress Administration, creating 9 million jobs. As a member of Congress, would you support a federal jobs program that would directly employ millions of Americans currently out of work on the scale of the New Deal?
Absolutely, I would. As we look at what's happening right now with our economy post-COVID, it's going to be very different. And the economy was having challenges even prior to COVID. So as we think about what a post-COVID world is going to look like, we have to do a few things. And there are things that I did as mayor of Tacoma when we were facing the recession in 2009 that we had to come out of, and I took office in 2010. Number one, you have to invest in workers. Number two, you have to invest in infrastructure. And number three, you have to invest in small businesses. So anything that I would consider as far as a recovery package would have to do all three of those things. In Tacoma, we put a measure on the ballot to raise the minimum wage, and 70% of the voters said yes to that. Tacoma had the highest minimum wage in Washington state for 2 consecutive years. We also invested in roads, transit, bridges, doing the things we had to do that would put people back to work in family wage jobs. And then finally, we were very intentional about supporting our small businesses. I was proud to open the Minority Business Development Agency in City Hall to ensure that local small businesses had access to technical expertise and access to capital. So it's investing in infrastructure, yes, but also making it very worker-centric so we can do something. It's one of the reasons I support pilot programs of universal basic income throughout the entire US to see if that is a program that can work. But it's about putting money in people's pockets. It's about investing in infrastructure to create great jobs, putting people back to work, fixing things, and also ensuring that we're supporting our small businesses.
Very good. Ms. Reeves, would you like to follow up on this question related to jobs and employment?
Sure. Well, as the only economic developer in this race, let's be clear. Trickle-down economics only works because people are investing in millionaires and billionaires and not everyday Americans. We have built over the last 40 years an economy that does not put people first. As somebody who has gone without health insurance and been put into tens of thousands of dollars of debt due to that, as somebody who knows what it's like to have to live paycheck to paycheck and worry about putting food on the table and keeping a roof over my family's head, that's what everyday Americans are dealing with right now, particularly in the middle of a global pandemic. We need people in Congress who are going to be committed to fighting to rebuild our economy with people at the center of it. And I think that that's what we need in Congress now more than ever, is somebody who has a lived experience of everyday Americans, but the technical experience to help us fight for an economy that's going to put people first and create a future that includes us all.
Thank you. Ms. Slotnick, you have 60 seconds to respond to this question on jobs and employment.
Well, as a small business owner, after I retired from the Army, my husband and I started a small business. And so I definitely know firsthand what it's like to struggle and put your whole life savings on the line to build a business from scratch. And so I feel the pain of the small business owners out there, especially those who are struggling right now during this COVID crisis, worried about whether or not their jobs are going to survive on the other end of this, and whether or not their companies are going to survive, and all the jobs that they provide to survive with them. So definitely I would support small business going forward, and also support employment.
Very good. Thank you for that. We're moving on to our next question. This one is for Ms. Doglio regarding healthcare. Ms. Doglio, your platform says that to address issues like the high cost of prescription drugs, surprise billing, and rising deductibles and copays, you believe the ultimate answer is a Medicare for all system. In the last 2 years of your term as a state legislator, you prime sponsored 45 bills. Not one of those bills addressed these issues of prescription drug, surprise billing, deductibles, or copays. These issues do not appear to have been a priority for you in the legislature. What will be different about your work on these issues in Congress?
Well, thank you, DJ, for the question. First of all, healthcare is something that is much more of an issue at the federal level than it is. I did not sit on the healthcare committee, but it is not true that I did no work on healthcare. In fact, well, as state legislator, what happened was the Medicaid rate in Grays Harbor County and counties across this state was so low that pediatricians were closing their doors because they couldn't afford to keep their doors open. And so I sat down with pediatricians in my own community who were overwhelmed by the number of kids who, 80% of kids in Grays Harbor County are on Medicaid, and they were coming into Thurston County. And so I worked like a dog to get additional dollars into the operating budget to raise Medicaid rates to try and make sure that kids throughout our state were provided the kind of health care that they needed and that they deserve. So I am unequivocally for a Medicare for all system. And I really look forward and have really dug in to understanding how we could move forward a Medicare for all system in this country so that every single person can get the kind of healthcare that they need. Now, I have a friend who's got laryngeal cancer, good health insurance, $10,000 in unexpected costs. And like many families, they had to start a GoFundMe campaign. Now, when the CEO healthcare CEOs make on average $7.7 million annually, and we have people who are struggling to pay their premiums, struggling to pay their deductibles. We have in-network and out-of-network systems. Let's get rid of that. And let's have one network. Super proud to work with Representative Pramila Jayapal, who has endorsed me, and Senator Bernie Sanders to work on moving Medicare for all forward.
Very good. Mr. Collins, would you like to respond or follow up to this question?
Yes. I'm mentioned before, I'm a truck driver. If you look up Joshua Collins' Huffington Post, you'll find a story that I did an interview about. When I was first a truck driver, when I first started out, I started to have an allergic reaction on the road. And, something about being a trucker is you're always out of network. So I had to choose between paying, I think it was $1,000 or something, or hoping that the allergic reaction didn't kill me. And I had to make that decision, and I frankly didn't have the money and would have had to borrow from friends and family. And so I had to sit in my truck, covered in hives, hoping that my airways didn't close. And so the healthcare issue is something that matters a lot to me. I support Medicare for all, not just because it's popular, not just because it's so overwhelmingly favored by the working class people in this country, but because it would affect me, my family, and everyone I know and love. And so I will fight for it if I am in Congress. Thank you.
I want to just note, candidates, that you've made it halfway through. You're doing a great job. And on behalf of all of us who are watching, more than 500 folks who've registered for this, and the folks that will watch this in different settings, including at The Wire and sent out by the Nature Conservancy, we are both really honored that you're with us tonight and making time, but we're also really, frankly, in awe of the slate and the quality of candidates. It's just not every campaign and every election where you get such an impressive group of folks working across the political spectrum who have performed so admirably. So thank you for your public service running as candidates this year. We're all appreciative of it. This is our 9th question, and this was for Ms. Slotnick on the question of racism and violence in America. Americans have taken to the streets to protest the multiple murders of African-American men and women by police in cities across America. These victims all have stories, they all have families, and their deaths have moved countless Americans across our country. Among these stories include Manny Ellis in Tacoma. And these stories, which of these stories has moved you the most? And as you think about your future in Congress, which of these stories do you think will inform your policymaking the most?
Well, I definitely think that the one that has moved me the most of the recent stories really is the George Floyd story. It was such an egregious situation. But I also have been really moved by a lot of the work of Senator Tim Scott when he talks about his own personal experiences as a sitting senator of being stopped 7 times in 1 year by police, or when he talks about being stopped going into the Senate when he was one of only 2 Black senators at the time and told that he was not recognized by the security guard. That the issue of racism in America is something we really need to confront head on. We need to bring it to a close. And I find it really sad that the bill that Tim Scott brought to the Senate has been blocked, because I think we had an incredible opportunity there to move this narrative forward and start legislating more to fix these problems. And that unfortunately, with the blockage of it, the time to address it may be kicked down the road to a further date until something terrible happens again. And I'm very saddened by the fact that that has been blocked.
Senator Tim Scott, of course, from South Carolina, the lone Republican African-American senator in the U.S. Senate. Mr. Gardner, you have 60 seconds to follow up.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks, DJ. And I just want to affirm that Black Lives Matter and Black trans lives matter. And as we continue this debate across the country, it's really important to keep centering this conversation on the victims of police brutality and white vigilantes around the country, which is really the core of what's happening here. I think of the stories you mentioned, the one that's moved me the most, they're all incredibly moving and disturbing, is Breonna Taylor out in Kentucky, whose murderers still have not been arrested. I worked as an EMT in college. Breonna Taylor was an EMT there in Kentucky, and I just then, I mean, again, all of these, all Black Lives Matter, and it's incredible that someone like Breonna Taylor, who was serving our community as an EMT during a pandemic, and yet was killed while she was sleeping in her own home, it's just such a tragic situation, and this has to change. And if we in this moment can't change it, then we just need to keep going, because this is something that's been with us for 400 years, and it's never going to go away until we finally reckon with it.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. This next question is for you, Ms. Reeves, on the topic in general of police conduct. A 2017 Reuters report found that between January 2015 and March 2016, the city of Tacoma received 215 complaint allegations filed against Tacoma police. Of those, 10 were sustained. Of the 215, 10 were sustained by police internal review boards, fewer than 5% of the total complaints. Of course, during this time, your opponent, Marilyn Strickland, was serving as Tacoma's mayor. While police reform is primarily an issue of local government, how will you use your position as a member of Congress to support police reform and accountability, particularly in instances of police violence against Black Americans?
Well, thank you, DJ. And let's be clear that many of us have been living with this as long as we've been alive. This is not new in America. This isn't a new problem that we need to solve. And we can't just move on to my competitor's point, because the reality is many of us are living in a society where we don't have the luxury of calling the police when we need protection, because we're more afraid of the police killing us when we call them than we are of them protecting us. We live in a society that has put too much on law enforcement. We ask them to be our mental health counselors. We ask them to be our substance abuse counselors. We ask them to do more in our society day and day. And quite frankly, we fund them as if they are the sole solution to the problems that we face in America. The reality is we need to do our job. And I think one of the ways that we can do this is at the federal level by making sure that we are properly funding our schools. I know here in Washington, we have not gotten to fully funding K through 12 education. We haven't funded school nurses. We haven't funded school counselors. We need to make sure that our kids are going back to a safe environment. We need to do more at the federal level to ensure that we're not surplusing military arms to the police department. And quite frankly, we need to get rid of a president who's willing to use the taxpayer-funded tools of government against their own citizens. Because at the end of the day, Black lives do matter. And you need somebody in Congress who understands that intrinsically, not from a performative progressive perspective. We need to make sure that folks are going to Congress with a lived experience that's going to help us both move progressive priorities and break down the systemic barriers that have held people back for far too long in this country. And I look forward to being that leader in Congress.
Thank you, Ms. Reeves. Ms. Doglio, would you like to follow up on this question?
Sure. I'm going to go back to your question before and say Andre and Bryson, because they were two unarmed Black men that were shot in Olympia by a police officer in 2015. The very first bill that I introduced as a legislator was on police accountability, and it proposed bold steps that at that time they were very controversial. But I did this because in the aftermath of that shooting and meeting with community members and hearing their stories, I was heartbroken and angry. And I knew I had to take responsibility to translate that into action. And I know I don't have the same experiences as my Black neighbors. No one person is as diverse as the people in their district. But I've shown where I stand on this issue, how I listen and seek out experiences of constituents different from my own, and how I stand up and legislate to that. And I look forward to doing that in Congress.
Very good, thank you. This next question is for you, Mr. Gardner, on the topic of gun violence and gun policy. You say you would support Congress adopting the Gun Violence Prevention and Community Safety Act, a package of reforms which includes mandating universal background checks, expanding federal background checks to all gun purchases, raising the minimum age for buying a firearm or ammunition from 18 to 21, among other provisions. All in all, these policies would impose stricter requirements on residents of Washington's 10th Congressional District to obtain a firearm. What do you say to voters in the district who have obtained a firearm legally and are frankly concerned about stricter gun policies? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'd say if you've obtained a firearm legally and are following all of our laws, then you have nothing to worry about. But the reality is that every gun violence death in America is preventable. All gun violence is preventable if we are to take proactive steps to end it. When I first went to work for Congressman Heck, just after he was elected in January of 2013, it was just after the tragedy at Sandy Hook, where 26 children were murdered in their classroom. And it was an incredibly emotional time to be on Capitol Hill. It was an incredibly emotional time in our nation. And I was proud to fight alongside him to try to make progress on gun violence safety at that time. Unfortunately, the filibuster stopped us in the Senate and a Republican majority in the House stopped us there. But sadly, more and more gun violence deaths have happened over the last 7-8 years. And with every passing day, I believe we do get closer and closer to finally bringing our gun violence epidemic under control. We have seen young people around this country with the March for Our Lives breathe new life into this movement. We have seen the power that having them in places of public prominence has. And if we really want to get serious about gun violence, if we really want to take action on it, I think we need to look at those ideas from the March for Our Lives, embrace an agenda of peace, and just fundamentally alter our country's relationship with firearms. It is out of line with any other Western democracy. It is out of line with any sort of place that believes that the lives of children matter, that believes the lives of women matter, that believes the lives of domestic violence victims matter. And the time is long, long overdue, and the political will is there. The only thing holding us up are special interests in the NRA and some folks in the U.S. Senate that need to go. And I would be proud in Congress to lead that fight for my generation and for all generations who want to see a future without gun violence in this country.
Thank you. Ms. Strickland, would you like to follow up?
I would. Thank you for that. I'm very proud of the fact that while I was mayor of Tacoma, we actually closed the gun show loophole for gun sales, and we required background checks before the state took action. But if we think about gun violence, there are a couple of data points I want to share. There are more guns in America than there are people. And when you think about who the victims are, we see the things on television that are the horrible mass shootings and the mass murders. But there are women who die at the hands of intimate partner violence because of guns. There are people who commit suicide because of gun violence. You hear stories about toddlers and young children who accidentally get their hands on guns and shoot siblings or do something accidental. So gun violence in many ways should be a public health crisis. That's how it should be treated, because that's exactly what it is. So as we think about what we need to do in Congress, voters overwhelmingly think that background checks are a good thing. It's a matter of whether or not we have the will to do the right thing. I think now's the right time to do it, because if we don't deal with gun violence in America, we will keep having these tragedies.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Strickland. Mr. Collins, this next question is for you. According to the Veterans Administration, the 10th district has the 10th most number of military veterans of any congressional district in the country. That equals 86,473 folks who've served our country in the military. In recent years, across multiple administrations, the Veterans Administration has struggled with multiple problems of access to care, administrative efficiency, modernization, and oversight. Today, in July of 2020, following a range of reform efforts, what grade would you give the VA's performance? And which reforms would you advocate for as changes continue at the Veterans Administration?
I don't know if I could grade it. And I think the experiences do kind of vary based on, what part of the country you live in, also what your needs are from the VA. I think that it's not perfect, but I do think that it is necessary, and it's something that we should continue having. And actually, I think one thing we actually need to do is double the number of VA facilities for a lot of veterans and a lot of military members. One of their biggest issues is that they have to drive sometimes 8 hours to get to a VA facility, and just access to those VA facilities is a pretty big problem. So I think we need to increase the number and put them in places where, frankly, there are people who can't access one without driving across the state. I think we need to talk about one of the most important things, which is money. We need to increase funding for the VA. Obviously, you can't improve it without actually paying for those improvements. So I think that we need to provide the resources for that. And I think we should do that with progressive taxation. I have a lot of friends and family members. I also know a lot of people in the district who live on JBLM and or the spouse of someone in the military. And I think they all agree that we should keep the VA under a single payer system. If they support a single payer system, they know that we need to keep this because it is something that addresses a specific set of issues that is relatively unique to military members and veterans. So I think that we also need to address the healthcare needs of their community members, people who aren't in the military. So, and I think that's why we need a Medicare for All system. So, yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Slotnick, would you like to follow up for 60 seconds?
Sure. I happen to be a patient at the VA hospital at American Lake. And I will start by saying that we are blessed to have a good, reliable VA hospital here in the 10th District in American Lake and in as well as the Seattle facility. That doesn't mean they're perfect. They're still far from perfect, but I have been a patient there for about 12 years myself. We definitely need to beef up the system. We need to ensure that the timeliness of getting appointments is taken care of. And if we have to go outside and use the choice system is still a good backup for those who can't get to a facility on time or have too far to travel or can't get in. And so I definitely think we need to improve the system and make it better. But and it's different in different parts of the country. I agree.
Good. Thank you. We're going to stick with you, Ms. Slotnick, for this next question. I want to pose this question to each of you for 60 seconds each, so you'll all be able to respond. We're moving into the fourth section of our conversation, focused less on policy and more on you as candidates and your campaigns. So I want to ask each of you, who are you outside of politics? We've heard a lot about policy, and we've heard a lot about the things that you would like to do in Congress and if elected. And of course, you're spending a lot of time during this campaign season talking about those things of policy and platforms and politics. But tell us who you are outside of politics. Give us a window into your life outside of the campaign trail, the things that you do that you think people would find to be the best window into who you are as a person outside the political world or off the campaign trail. So Ms. Slotnick, for 1 minute, 60 seconds, go ahead and take a crack at that one.
Okay, well, I'm a 25-year U.S. Army retired veteran, combat veteran from Somalia. My husband and I own a small business focused on risk assessments and protecting our infrastructure and small businesses and our faith communities. And I'm the mother of four, two veterans, one child with special needs, one member of the LGBT community, and one blue collar worker. Also my father died when I was quite young, so I grew up in the Social Security system, grew up below the poverty level, joined the Army straight out of high school because there wasn't money for college. And let's see, what else? And my husband and I enjoy motorcycles.
And now you're a candidate for Congress.
Now I'm a candidate for Congress.
Mr. Collins, tell us about yourself and how we might get to know you outside of the world of politics.
Had a really hard life. And when I say that, I mean, I could tell you any number of stories that things I've experienced in this country that would probably put you to tears, but I don't think it's unusual. I think, if you're someone who grew up poor, if you're someone who, has been a worker in America, you know how difficult it is. I mean, you know how easily your boss can screw you over, your insurance company can screw you over, your bank, your landlord. And I think the number one thing that defines me and separates me from, frankly, everyone else in this call and in this race in general is I am not a career politician. I never intended to run for office. I spent the last 5 years as a truck driver. I've been to 48 states. Before that, I was a factory line worker. Before that, I worked in customer service. Before that, I worked at a grocery store. So yeah, I'm a worker. That's who I am.
And now you're a candidate for office. I appreciate you being here. Mr. Gardner, tell us about you.
Yeah, well, I grew up here in the 10th Congressional District, attended Puyallup Public School, Shaw Road, and Meeker Elementary, and graduated high school in University Place. During my time working alongside Congressman Heck, I lived down in Thurston County in Olympia, and I'm currently a homeowner over in Tacoma's McKinley neighborhood. And, you know, my life, sort of everything that I've really tried to do, I think has been driven by a sense of service and a desire to help the world around me. I was raised by two Unitarian Universalists who instilled social justice into me from a very early age. And throughout, you know, every sort of theater or different space I've been in, I've just tried to sort of be helpful to the world around me, because I think there's too much suffering in this world. There's too much cruelty in this world. And there's not enough people trying to do something about it. And so, you know, in college, I helped run a summer camp for children whose families were coping with cancer. I've, you know, grew up a camp kid myself, was happy to pass that along. I guess that's the most political thing that has really brought me joy in my life. But yeah, I'm a kid from this district. Thank you.
Ms. Reeves, tell us about you outside of politics.
Thanks, DJ. Well, first and foremost, I'm the working mom of a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. It's what drives my day every day. But I'll tell you, I'm also the twin sister of a 17-year combat veteran in the United States Air Force. It's what's driven my career over the last 12 years, serving veterans and military families in the 10th Congressional District. I'm somebody who is the product of our social safety net. I grew up in and out of foster care. I was homeless at 16. And I had the good fortune to be the first in my family to graduate from college, thanks to the state need grant, amazing public school educators, and way too many student loans. So I definitely know what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to fight, to overcome, and work hard. And I know what it means when communities come together to take care of each other. I'm proud to have worked for Senator Murray for several years as her district director here in the 10th, to serve Governor Inslee in the state as an economic development director, and to serve in the Washington State Legislature, fighting to put people first in our economy, for our kids and for working families. And I look forward to the opportunity to do that in Congress. Little tidbit about me, I'm a genealogist and a calligrapher.
Very good. Ms. Doglio, tell us about you.
All right. Well, I too am a mom of a 16 and a 21-year-old boy. And I really loved volunteering in their elementary school classrooms, and was the PTA president at Roosevelt Elementary in Olympia. I have lived, unlike my opponents, in the district for over 2 decades and raised my family here. I really love to be on the water and in the mountains, and I am a runner, and I have this goal that I'm doing every month. I'm trying to get 42 miles in, so I get 500 by the end. That is keeping me sane through this campaign. I have also spent time volunteering at a homeless shelter and I've taught English as a second language, and my husband and I spent a little bit of time, about a year in Nicaragua, and we have a long-term relationship with that country, going back and forth and volunteering, and also hosting people here from our sister county in Olympia. So final thing is I love to dance and sing.
Very good. Thank you very much. Ms. Strickland, to you.
So if you go to my personal Twitter handle, I have a few words that describe who I am. I say daughter, wife, stepmom, and then whatever my profession is at the time. And right now I'm a candidate for Congress. And I put those things in that order because my parents had and have such a strong influence on me. My father served in the military. My mother was an immigrant from Korea. I was born in Seoul. And the hardship that they had to experience while they were here in this country when they first got here is nothing I can even imagine. And they did everything in their power to make sure that I had access to a good education. I'm a proud Tacoma Public Schools kid. I went to the University of Washington, and they instilled in me that education is going to be the key for you to do the things that we could not do. And so everything I do as an elected official, as a person, is about social justice, civil rights, and ensuring that the progress that I've had is something that can pass on to every generation.
Thank you, Ms. Strickland. We're going to stick with you for this next question.
Okay.
In your previous life, not too many lifetimes ago, you were CEO of the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, one of the most prominent civic engagement or civic positions in the city, leading an organization that represents and lobbies for 2,200 local businesses. While you were CEO, the Chamber's political arm spent heavily on the Seattle City Council elections, including a $1.45 million donation from Amazon. Based on your experience as an elected official and an advocate on behalf of the City of Seattle's business community, at what point do you feel like money becomes a problem in politics? And what do you suggest candidates do outside of an act of Congress? What do you suggest candidates do to mitigate that money becoming a problem in our politics?
Well, thank you for that question. It costs too much money to run for office, and there's too much money that comes in, period. I guarantee you that everyone sitting here today is saying to themselves, why do I spend 6 hours a day having to ask for money to be considered a viable candidate? So we need campaign finance reform. We need some kind of mechanism that allows the field to be even, because the ability to have to raise money is often a barrier to people who come from underrepresented communities. So the amount of money that was spent in that race was excessive because it costs a lot of money to run for office. And there was $4 million total of outside money that came into that race from a lot of different groups. That's the system that we're in. And I wish it were different. And when I get to Congress, I'm going to absolutely positively advocate for campaign finance reform, because the amount of time that we spend trying to raise money instead of spending time with people, getting to know them, learning about the issues and developing policy, that's what we should be doing as candidates. So I absolutely agree that there's too much money that is spent in politics today. But in that case, you had people who were unknown. They had to get their name out there, and that's what it takes to actually win campaigns. So until we have a system of campaign finance reform, unfortunately, this is the game, this is the hand that we're dealt. This is what it takes to get your message out to people. So the other thing I would say too is when we think about politics at the local, state, and federal level, we need to reform it so that the field is level, so that it doesn't cost so much money to run for office, and we can run on ideas, experience, and what we want to do instead of solely based on how much money everyone's raising.
Very good. Mr. Collins, would you like to follow up?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up because something wasn't accurate. I know a lot of the candidates in this race do spend 6 hours a day talking to donors, raising money. I don't. I've done something very different in raising all of my money from social media from people all around the country. An average donation of about $15, over $250,000. And as far as I know, I'm the only candidate in this race who has a majority of my donations being small donations rather than large donations. Now, I think that if me, a truck driver, a regular person, someone who never had any career in politics and has done all of this with nothing but a smartphone and a Twitter account and some other social media account, if I can raise $250,000 with just that, I think that if you are a sitting politician, a state representative, an ex-mayor, another sitting state representative, a person who works in politics, you should be able to raise the money without going to the very wealthy, without spending hours and hours asking the very rich for money. I tried calling very wealthy donors. I took a list of Bernie donors, and my first call that I ever got told me that if I wanted money from them, I'd have to change my policies. And I didn't.
Appreciate it. Mr. Gardner, would you like to follow up on this question of campaigns and money?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure everybody on this, call in this race, I think, believes in the values of campaign finance reform. But I want to go back to what I said earlier, which is that all three of my Democratic opponents are right now actively soliciting help from a super PAC. You can go to any of their websites and find it yourself. It's a notorious loophole, and it's frankly a little scary, because what happens is when you go to Congress and you buy into that system early on, you can't ever go against whoever funded that super PAC to get you there. And in that sense, you owe your loyalty to the donors of that super PAC or whoever's controlling that super PAC, and not the voters of this district. And I've worked alongside Denny Heck, and he got elected here 4 times. He never once put up a red box, never once asked for super PAC help. You win the 10th district by working hard and following the rules. And I hope all three of my opponents take down their red boxes tonight.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Doglio, this next question is to you. In crowded primaries, sometimes candidates need to position themselves away from the political center to secure a political base on either the left or the right. In a crowded field, this is particularly true. The center can seem like an empty place sometimes in a campaign season. When the campaign is over, and if you win this seat in Congress, will your approach to legislating be one of tacking to the left where the Democratic base may be, or will you seek to build consensus in the political center where there may be more votes for final passage?
Well, I think you can look at my record in the legislature and recognize that I am a progressive and my values are progressive, and I have been very, very true to those progressive values time and time again. But you can also look at my record and you can see that I've worked across my caucus and across the aisle to build consensus, to negotiate bills where people see themselves in the bill. So in that negotiating room, when you are in that negotiating room listening very closely to what people need, they make the policy better. So I don't think it's necessarily about tacking left or tacking right or finding the center. I think it's finding solutions to move our country forward. And I can tell you that as a state legislator, that is what I have done. Whether it's been on helping part-time state employees organize, whether that is on climate change, where I have moved a number of different issues forward that reduce our greenhouse gases, whether it's women's issues, whether it's gun responsibility issues, where I have the endorsement, the sole endorsement of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility because of my work on that issue. I've been able to find solutions by working with everybody across the aisle and across my caucus. And that's what I'll continue to do in Congress. And I'm an organizer at heart, right? I'm a community organizer. So I organize to bring that power from the outside into the chambers to create these progressive policies where people feel good and we're finding a way forward in passing policies. And so that's the kind of legislator I've been and the kind of congresswoman I will be.
Thank you. Mr. Collins, would you like to follow up on this topic of campaigning versus governing?
Could you repeat the question for me?
Sure. The question is about governing philosophy, and when the campaign is over, and if you win this seat in Congress, will your approach be one of legislating by tacking to the left where the Democratic base may be, or will you seek to build consensus in the political center to line up votes for final passage?
So I have over 100 policies on my website, and I take a lot of stances that are very unique to me. A good example is on gun issues. We have a military base in our district. We have a lot of people who care very deeply about their gun rights. And I believe in a community armory system, which is something you might be familiar with the Switzerland system. If I were in Congress, I would be fighting for what I think and what the people think is right, and making sure that we are taking care of the working class, making sure that we are addressing issues in a rational way that is proven to work. And I think that there are a whole host of issues where neither party gets that right. So.
Thank you. Ms. Slotnick, how about you? Perhaps the question is different about tacking to the right because of your party affiliation. Would you prefer to tack to the right in terms of governing, or move towards the center to line up votes for final passage?
Well, what many of you may or may not know is that in 2018, I ran for this same seat as an independent and as a centrist. One of the things that brought me to this after I never had intended to run for political office was my frustration at watching the hyper-partisan bickering. And I think that it's very critical that we work to collaborate together. I think that the Justice Act that was just squelched in the Senate is a prime example of how instead of collaborating, we blocked something because the other party's name was attached to it. And I think we need to do a better job of collaborating. Veterans, I think, bring a unique ability to collaborate because we're used to hearing all sides and then moving forward to achieve the mission. And that's the way I would approach governing.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Reeves, this last question, though I will come back to this is question 16, I should say. Getting things done in Congress takes significant skill related to coalition building. There are, of course, 435 members in the House of Representatives if we don't count the delegates from places like Washington, D.C. There are over 250 caucuses in Congress, just in the House itself. Can you tell us which members you would seek to work with if you are elected to Congress, and which caucuses you would want to join to give us a sense about how you would go about building coalitions?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, DJ. And let's be clear, I think what that represents is the diversity of thought that folks choose to ask people to represent in our government. I tell folks that we spend billions of dollars every year training people how to run for office, spending money, as we were just talking about, to get people elected to office. We spend almost no money teaching people how to govern. What I tell people is campaign politics is about the us versus them, me versus you. We're seeing it, how do we distinguish ourselves? The reality is governance is about the collective we. It is about putting problem solving before partisan politics to get the job done on behalf of the American people. I think I might be the only candidate in this race who's actually had to beat a Republican at the ballot box and then turn around and work with Republicans to get environmental justice over the finish line, to make sure that we were creating opportunities for accessible and affordable childcare for working families. And I tell people, I learned that lesson the day I got elected, 10 days after Donald Trump won his campaign in 2016. I became the 51st Democrat to hold the House majority that year. I won by less than 1%. And that meant that 49% of people did not vote for me. And I could have tacked to the left and shoved my policy down people's throats, or I could do the hard work of what people were asking me to do, which was to figure out how to problem solve on behalf of all of our communities. And so I spent the next 2 years working to understand what the 49% of people who didn't vote for me cared about. And I came back in 2018 and I won my election by 64% in a conservative swing district. Because what matters most is that campaigning is for campaigning and governance is for governance. And we need to understand that those two things are not the same. And so when I am in Congress, I have a proven track record of working inside my caucus, across the aisle, to make sure that we are moving progressive priorities, but not just moving progressive priorities, dismantling the systems that create barriers for people like me to even serve in Congress and represent the communities that are all too often left out, left behind, or just left, period. And so I look forward to bringing that leadership to Congress and serving the constituents of the 10th.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Slotnick, same question to you about with whom would you like to work in Congress and which political caucuses might you want to join?
Well, a couple of people that I really admire. I'm assuming you're talking about working across the aisle when you say who I'd like to work with in Congress. A couple of people that I really admire are Elaine Luria and Alyssa Slotkin. And so I would hope to work with them. Also, definitely several on the Republican side. I strongly support Kathy McMorris Rogers, who has endorsed me. Also, I'm a big supporter of Dan Crenshaw, so I look forward to working with both of them. Caucuses, wow. Well, the Congressional Down Syndrome Caucus is one that's very interesting to me. And also, let's see. There's also a Republican Jewish caucus that I'd like to be involved in. So.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Mr. Gardner, would you like to follow up for 60 seconds on this question?
Sure, yeah. Within the House Democratic Caucus, there's a bunch of different caucuses, but there's sort of a few that are sort of defining membership caucuses. And, I'll admit, I don't think I fit precisely into any of them. I'm a pretty independent thinker. The way I like to describe myself is a liberal Democrat with progressive values. And, the Progressive Caucus has so many values that I agree with and so many awesome members doing such great work. And I know Representative Doglio is a big fan of theirs. And I think if she gets there, she'd be an outstanding member for them. I also think that there's more there than just making a point. We need to also get things done. And I think that in order to do that, you need to look beyond just your ideological base, but you always need to stick to your values. I think the big point to make in this coming Congress is it's going to be such an important 2 years for our country. And it's so important that we have someone there who knows how it works. And there's an old saying that says members take 2 years to find the bathrooms. I already know where the bathrooms are. I already know where the speaker's office is. I'm going to get to work on day one.
Very good. I will say that it's not every day you slate 16 questions with very smart, politically savvy candidates for elected office, and they come in under the time deadline. But you all have, so I'm going
Very well behaved.
I'm going to call the audible here and add one question that we have not scripted. And so Nature Conservancy's lawyer might be freaking out right now, but this is a time in our country that is obviously very polarizing, very divisive, and it feels like sometimes the ties that bind us are falling apart. What on the campaign trail has given you the most hope in these last number of months, the most hope about the future of our country and our ability to solve problems together? I'll give each of you 45 seconds to answer this question. Ms. Strickland, I'll start with you first. What has given you the most hope from your time on the campaign trail?
Well, in the time of COVID, when you're on the phone calling voters, they're home and they're answering. And so we've had the opportunity to have some really nice in-depth conversations. And I would say that one of the things I'm hearing from folks is, you know what, we need people to solve problems. And I'm proud to have the endorsement of Andrew Yang, who was a presidential candidate. And one of the things that appealed to me about him was that he has a theme. It says, not left, not right, forward. And that's what people want. They want leaders to move this nation forward and not get caught up on labels. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I was an Obama delegate. I will ride for that. But I think people want folks to solve problems, and there's an appetite for it. And there's an appetite for trying new ideas. And so that's what gives me a lot of hope.
Very good. I should reiterate that you'll all still have 90 seconds for closing comments here in just a minute, but I want to give each of you this opportunity to speak to what has given you hope. Ms. Reeves, what has given you hope from your experience on the campaign trail this year?
People, quite frankly, the fact that communities continue to come together to take care of each other, whether it is pivoting donations to food banks and PPE efforts, whether it's making sure that we are fighting for our kids' schools and access to education, communities coming together, and the people that are leading the charge in that, the youth movement and Black Lives Matter people is what gives me hope and faith and confidence that we can get through this together, that we will get through this together, and that we're going to send leaders to Congress who are going to put problem solving over partisan politics.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Collins, what has given you hope?
I would say that the thing that has given me the most hope is the youth in our district. I've worked with a lot of really young people, and when I say young people, I mean from high schoolers to college age people, and also people who aren't going to college but are that age. And I've just seen them compared to organizations full of experienced adults. I've seen young people be some of the most effective and organized and passionate and hardworking people out of all of the organizations I've worked with. And particularly, I'd like to compliment the Washington Youth for Climate Action organization. They've been amazing. They endorsed me. They've been supporting me, and they've just been really effective with what they've been doing. So,
thank you. Ms. Slotnick, what has given you hope?
I just muted instead of unmuting. So I think that I have really been impressed by the way that the voters I'm talking to are really coming out against racism. I am seeing so much move in that direction that people are actually starting to really listen and become more aware of marginalized communities and what's happening there, and trying to put themselves in the place of truly listening and understanding what's happening in our country, and seeing if we can move that forward and fix that history.
Very good. Mr. Gardner, how about you? What gives you hope from your experience on the campaign trail?
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily something that's happened on the campaign trail, but something that I've observed while being on the campaign trail, and that is just watching our healthcare workers all over the country take care of so many people in such incredible circumstances. And as I think it was Mayor Strickland who mentioned, there are days on this campaign that are very long and not particularly enjoyable. You compare that to the experiences that so many of our frontline healthcare workers, essential workers all over the country are going through, and it really just can't compare. And just seeing that resiliency, both in our hospitals and our healthcare settings, but all over the country and communities, it just really gives me hope to keep going, and that I think that once we get the man in the White House gone, that our country, we're going to make it through this.
Thank you. Ms. Doglio, what gives you hope from your experience on the campaign trail?
Well, certainly the way that our communities have responded to the pandemic. I think that's been really a sense of hope. I have so much hope. I have hope, the hundreds of volunteers that are helping me on my campaign and having conversations with voters every day and really engaging in the issues and talking about how the country can move a Green New Deal forward, how we can move to Medicare for all. And it's been especially awesome to get on to the Zoom phone banks and see so many young people who are taking their future in their hands and talking to other people about their values and about this campaign. It has just given me so much hope that we can really take our nation back and restore our democracy and move towards community.
Very good. Thank you. Candidates, you've really done an amazing job. Thank you again for your time this evening. I do want to move into an opportunity for closing comments. You'll each have 90 seconds, and we will go in the reverse order with that we started in. So to kick off our closing comments, Ms. Slotnick, you can start first. Again, you have 90 seconds.
Well, as I've said, I never expected to find myself running for office. I did not ever set up for this. I considered the 25 years that I spent in the Army to be my public service. And as I became more and more disturbed with what was happening, I decided I needed to step forward and answer the call of my nation again. And I think I'm a really good fit for this district. I have lived here for 33 years in what's now the 10th district, starting with my first assignment to Fort Lewis in 1987. And I've raised 4 children here. I've started a small business here. We do have the 10th highest number of veterans of any congressional district in the nation. And JBLM is the largest employer. Our small business represents 54% of the businesses in the 10th district and 94% of the employment. So I think all of those things, as well as being a mother of 4 successful adult children, is something that makes me a unique fit for this district. And I think I can represent us well in Congress.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Gardner, would you like to offer 90 seconds for closing statements?
Yeah, well, thank you, DJ, for hosting into the Nature Conservancy. It's wonderful that we're able to have this public forum, even in these tough times. There's another one that the League of Women Voters are hosting next week that I hope folks will Google and turn into. Look, this is a Democratic district, and it's going to be represented by a Democrat. And so voters in this district have a choice. You have 3 candidates who are being backed by super PACs from out of state, funded by dark money, and they're openly coordinating with them. They want their help. That's their plan to win. Solicit support from super PACs. It's on their website right there out in the open. Or you can go a different path. I'm the only candidate who grew up in this district, worked in it, and lives here today. I'm the only candidate committed first and foremost to the people who live in this district above all else. And that's why I got in this district. I've got unmatched federal experience working alongside Congressman Denny Heck. I spent the last 3 years under Donald Trump serving in national politics, resisting him, saving the Affordable Care Act, fighting him, impeaching him. And, I got in this race because when I looked at our country in January, I saw us at a crossroads where we are going to decide in this election who our government is going to work for and what our government is going to use its power to do. And right now, our government isn't working for most people, and it is definitely not working for young people. And instead of using our government's power to solve big problems, the people in charge are using our government to line their own pockets and cover up their crimes and separate children from their families. And we have to change that. We have to take back our government. We have to take back our future. And it can start right here in the 10th Congressional District with your support. And I'd be honored to earn your vote. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Collins, would you like to offer closing comments?
Yeah. I've lived in the 10th district for about 4 years. And before that, I lived where I worked. I lived in California, where my trucking job was. I moved here for work. I've lived in 6 states. And I've also been to 48 states. I've been to every major city in this country. I'm a truck driver. I traveled everywhere. I've slept in more Walmart parking lots than anyone you know. And my experience is something that is not very common in, not just in Congress, but in political spaces in general. I have not met a single other truck driver in organizing. And if I were in Congress, I would be taking an entirely different approach than anyone in this race. I would not be going in to rub elbows with the other politicians and, hope that my corporate lobbyist friends would support me and help me get some stuff, some little crumbs passed. I would be fighting for everything, for clean water, for our roads to be fixed, for an end to the wars, and for us to clean up our ocean and fix our schools, and to take care of people, to take care of the working class, to get everyone health care. I mean, that's what I would do in Congress. And yeah, I work 70 hours a week most of my adult life, and I would do that for you in Congress. So,
thank you. Ms. Doglio, would you like to offer closing comments?
I'm sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. The 10th Congressional District deserves a progressive champion that has a proven track record of working collaboratively, winning campaigns, and passing landmark legislation. You can count on me to put people first, and that's why I'm not taking corporate PAC contributions. I will make sure that our nation's workers and the unemployed, families, and small businesses are the first in line for relief dollars. I have a 30-year history of working for advocacy organizations standing up to powerful lobbies like coal, oil, LNG, and the chemical industry, and actually winning. I unequivocally support Medicare for All and the Green New Deal. I would be the first LGBTQ member of Congress from Washington State, and I'm committed to inclusive policymaking and addressing institutional racism. I am proud to have earned the endorsement of Quinault President Fawn Sharp, Senator Bernie Sanders, Representative Pramila Jayapal, 45 of my colleagues in the state legislature, and over 135 elected officials. I've worked hand in hand with labor, advocating for working families, and have the sole endorsement of the Washington State Labor Council and 17 other labor unions. My depth and breadth of policy and organizing work in the legislature have also earned me the endorsement of the Washington Housing Alliance, the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, and Fuse. I hope to earn your vote on August 4th, and you can go to the web at www.doglio.com. And I really appreciate everybody engaging today.
Thank you very much. Ms. Strickland, your turn.
Well, thank you very much for our host tonight and to everyone watching. In times of crisis, leadership matters. And as the former mayor of Tacoma, I had the opportunity to lead a city out of a crisis. It was an economic crisis that hurt a lot of people. We focused on workers, we invested in infrastructure, we focused on small business, and we stayed focused on solving problems. When I think about who's in Congress now, I think about the fact that the lens of local government, the people who are on the ground every day with the people, is desperately needed in Congress. There are 41 former mayors who are in Congress right now. So the transition from mayor to Congress is not that odd. But I say this as someone who loves this community, as someone who grew up here, who understands the amazing diversity of the 10th district in every possible sense of the word. If you send me to Congress, you're going to help me make history. You'll help us make history. I will be the first African-American member of the Washington State delegation and the first Korean-American woman to serve in US history. It's why I'm endorsed by trusted and respected leaders like former governors Chris Gregoire, Gary Locke, former Congressman Norm Dix, by Andy Kim, and a whole host of other people. But this is about my life experience and understanding that we can solve all these big problems, housing, healthcare, economics, but there has to be an anti-racist lens. And I'm the only person in this race who's done that work as mayor.
Very good.
Like on my website. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Reeves.
Well, thank you to our host this evening, to you, DJ, for moderating such a great panel. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Kristine Reeves. I'm running for Congress because I know what it's like to be hungry and I know what it's like to be homeless. I'm the product of our state's investments in our social safety net. I grew up in and out of foster care. I was homeless at 16, and I had the good fortune to be the first in my family to graduate from college, thanks to amazing public school educators and way too many student loans. I'm running because I know what it's like to struggle. I know what everyday Americans are going through. It's not that I want more politicians in DC to know what that's like. It's that I want fewer Americans to know what it's like. But maybe if just a few more politicians actually understood what everyday Americans were going through, we'd figure out how to solve these problems a lot faster. I'm the only candidate in this race ready to hit the ground running from day one. As both a former congressional staffer and a legislatively elected official, I know both how to get laws passed, how to move progressive priorities, and to work in my caucus and across the aisle to get things done. That's what the folks in the 10th district deserve. That's what working families, what our kids, what our veterans and military families deserve. They deserve somebody who is going to rebuild our economy with people at the center of it. They deserve somebody who has a track record of getting things done, and somebody who is going to commit their time in Congress to fighting for them. And so I am here tonight to say thank you for your support, and I will continue to work to earn every single vote to serve you in the 10th district.
Candidates, thank you all. You've given the voters of the 10th Congressional District a lot of great insight into your platforms, your policies, and your campaign directions. I think we're all very much appreciative and honored with your engagement with us here tonight. Democrats, Kristine Reeves, Marilyn Strickland, Beth Doglio, and Phil Gardner, Joshua Collins of the Essential Workers Party, and Republican Nancy Slotnick, thank you all. Special thanks very much to our co-hosts, the Nature Conservancy of Washington. We at The Wire have appreciated you joining us. We appreciate the candidates' good work, and we'll have this full video posted at our website, WashingtonStateWire.com. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you at our next debate, which is July 15th with the candidates for Lieutenant Governor. Thanks for watching.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Plan to join us on July 15th for a debate between the candidates for Lieutenant Governor. To register for that free event, please visit us at thewashingtonstatewire.com.